Welcome to Channel's Business Global with me, Juliana Olayinka, from our studios here in London. Coming up on today's show, as Nigeria escapes an $11 billion bill over a failed gas project, questions are being asked about what lessons can be learned from Sham business deals and what the next chapter of Brand Nigeria across the globe should look like. Journalist and government communications consultant Tolu Ogunlesi will be joining me from Paris with his suggestions. And as cocoa surges to the highest level in 44 years on the New York Stock Exchange, efforts to ensure prices trickle down to smallholder farmers are being intensified. His Royal Majesty Oba Dokun Thompson and Clay Gordon of the International Cocoa and Chocolate Forum will be joining me here in the studio to share the major talking points from their cocoa event held here in the British capital this week. Then later, prominent Nigerians living in the UK gather in Abuja House to bid farewell to the outgoing High Commissioner to the United Kingdom, Ambassador Sharifa Tunji Isola. But first, Nigeria's Supreme Court rejected petitions by two opposition leaders to have President Bola Ahmed Tinubu's election declared illegal, bringing an end to an 8-month legal battle to overturn the results of the nation's closest vote since the return to democracy in 1999. President Tinubu now has a clear mandate to govern the continent's most popular nation, which is grappling foreign currency shortages and a weakening naira. Staying with Nigeria, the government dodged having to pay out as much as $11.5 billion after a London judge ruled that the arbitration award over a failed gas deal handed to a hedge fund-backed firm was won fraudulently. The ruling, which can still be appealed, will come as some relief to Africa's biggest crude producer's economy that's fighting double-digit inflation and falling oil revenues. Well, for more on this, I'm now being joined by Tolu Ogunlesi, journalist and government communications consultant. Tolu joins me from Paris. Tolu Ogunlesi, it's an absolute pleasure having you on Channel's Business Global. It is the first time. I was just saying to you off camera, it's a coup. So earlier this week, big story, apart from the Supreme Court ruling, of course, is the fact that Nigeria escaped an $11.5 billion bill by what we now know is a sham firm. What lessons do you think need to be learned about the fast tracking of contracts to foreign investors with no fixed abode?
We are all super glad that we escaped that. It's $11.5 billion is a significant chunk of, whether it's our external reserves or our annual budget. But, as you've pointed out, I think for me, the most important thing is the lessons, going forward. What lessons are we learning? One of the most important ones is that we've got to sanitize the systems for getting into these contracts and these deals, the whole system. There just has to be a way to make it more transparent, more organized. You can't have government agencies kind of just on their own getting into deals that involve the entire country, which is what happened here, basically. You had a ministry signing this at a time of what you might call intense sort of national chaos. Signing this deal that had little or no scrutiny. So there has to be a way. The good news is that in the last 1 year or so, there's been such a system being put in place, something called the FCAS, Federal Contracts Administration System. I'm not sure how far it's gone, but the idea is just to have this single portal where all government contracts and deals of this nature have to pass through, and have to be vetted by the Justice Ministry. So, it's I hope that it's fully implemented. It's been announced, I believe it's been launched, but honestly, I don't know how far it's gone, but it has to be. I hope that the new administration will go a long way to make sure that, or do everything possible to make sure that it's fully implemented. So for me, that's one big lesson, sanitizing the system of awarding government contracts.
Absolutely, that is one big lesson. I think it's worth pointing out as well that according to the lawyers of Process and Industrial Development, P&ID, as we all know them as, they have said that, perhaps they will be appealing. So fingers crossed you know,
Fingers
this is
crossed on that.
dismissed, but I don't think the case is over just yet. Let me bring this conversation a bit wider, Tolu, if I may, because, of course, the entire saga has brought about Nigeria's reputation. As per usual, brand Nigeria is a hot topic on social media, not just domestically, though, but around the world. And the narratives couldn't be more opposing at the moment. I know you travel frequently. You're in Paris at the moment. What is the true perception of brand Nigeria by international observers?
Well, you know, so how long do we have? You know, that's a big question. But you know, I think it's a mixed bag. I think it's a mixed bag. There is on the one hand, you know, there are the negative perceptions. You know, the whole idea of kind of, you know, long-standing negative perceptions around, you know, the idea of you know, what used to be called the Nigerian letter, you know, 419
Or the
and
email.
the emails, yeah, the emails and all that, you know. But on the other hand, also you have, you know, you have our music, you know, you have our films, you know, you have our literature, you have, you know, the fact that Things Fall Apart is one of the best known novels anywhere in the world. On any list of classics, you will find Things Fall Apart. You have the fact that there's nowhere you go these days where you will not hear our music, you know, our music. You know, it took a while for me to accept that term Afrobeats, just because of how confusing it is when you think of like Fela's style of music. But, you know, to think that our Afrobeats there's nowhere in the world you go today that you will not hear it played in cafes anywhere in the world, you know. So, you know, you have to think of the fact that, look, there's nowhere I enter a taxi in the world where once the taxi driver hears I'm Nigerian, they don't mention a football star. So it's a mixed bag, you know. People know us as an oil producing country, you know. So it's, for me, it's just about, the question is, the question then should be, how do we ensure that the positives outweigh the negatives? You know, how do we drown out negative perceptions with positives? You know, the US is known all over the world for its mass shootings and school shootings, and yet that does not define the US. You know, so it's not, I don't think it's about an absence of negative connotations or associations, but it's about making sure that the positives outweigh the negatives. I think that's the question that we should be asking ourselves as a nation. P&ID, of course, you know, linking it to this P&ID issue, I guess, you know, it's also an opportunity for us to ask ourselves questions about how do we use this, you know, I mean, this publicity, the fact that we're in the news, how do we use these things as opportunities to send a message about what Nigeria is really all about? You know, the talent of young people, the reforms that government is making, the fact that, look, we say we are open for investment and all that, you know, and making it a clear point that we are open for investment with people who actually want to do business and not the P&ID kind of business people. So it's about, for me, it's always about looking at whatever we have to deal with and the opportunities that we can sort of take out of whatever is happening to us at any point in time.
Thank you, Tolly. We're running out of time here, and you're right. But of course, we know that optimism is one thing. I think the reality is quite another. There are lots of people supporting this new administration who clearly are facing an uphill battle. We've got sky-high inflation, sky-high unemployment. The Naira is sinking, whether we like it or not. What is President Tinubu doing right, and what more do you hope to see?
So definitely the messaging, for starters, the messaging, I think, has been very on point. You know, this idea of seeing himself as the chief marketing officer of Nigeria. So whether it was in India or in New York at the UN, you know, and all the international engagements he's done, you know, even at the NES this week, you know, the messaging has been on point. He's very good at communicating, and I think it starts with that messaging, the posturing. You know, and then, of course, you have, you know, quite a number of the big decisions that have been taken. So, for example, you know, the work on tax reform that's ongoing and fiscal policy, the work on the CNG buses, as a long-term way out of the impact of the removal of fuel subsidy. Even the fact that the fuel subsidy that is gone now. Finally, which has long been envisaged, even in the Petroleum Industry Act. So there's a lot of that. Unfortunately, it just takes a lot of time, and this calls for a lot of patience from Nigerians. But I don't have any doubt that we are on the right track. And with time, with these difficult decisions, I have no doubt that we will see a lot of the benefits that we expect from these difficult decisions.
Well, fingers crossed, because of course, if the administration succeeds, all of us, even us in the diaspora,
absolutely.
we too
Absolutely.
succeed. Tolu Ogunlesi, Nigerian journalist and communications consultant that's worked for previous administrations, including, I'm sure, consulting for this current one. Tolu, thank you so much for your expertise and time today.
Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure.
Thanks, Tolu. Now to the war in the Middle East. According to Downing Street, about 200 British nationals have registered with UK authorities to say that they are trapped in Gaza. A team of border force officials have been sent to Egypt to try and help them leave the besieged region. Meanwhile, Sir Keir Starmer is battling to convince Labour MPs he has taken the right stance on the Israel-Hamas conflict, as up to 4 members of the shadow cabinet are said to be on a resignation watch list. More than 150 Muslim Labour councillors have signed an open letter to the leader of the UK opposition, urging him to back a ceasefire between Israel and Hamas. Well, for more on this, I was earlier joined in the studio by our business correspondent, Simon Pusey. Simon, so I think we're pretty much sure on where Prime Minister Rishi Sunak stands in this war that's ongoing in the Middle East. But this week, the Prime Minister in waiting, Sir Keir Starmer, has faced lots of controversy about his back and forth. I think there was a failed trip to a mosque that didn't go down too well. What exactly is his stance at the moment? And do you think this could affect him in the upcoming election?
Yeah, well, I think the problem for Sir Keir Starmer is, as has been quite often over the last few weeks and months, is that he doesn't really have a different position to Rishi Sunak. Now, that's fine, but there are lots of other things at play here. So you'll remember that during Jeremy Corbyn era, the Labour Party were accused many times of being anti-Semitic. Right. One of Sir Keir Starmer's main drives was to root out anti-Semitism from the party. Now you've got 2 very delicate positions in terms of the war in the Middle East, and you've got obviously your Jewish community to think about, and then your Palestinian community, and it's whether he's got the right balance. So at the moment, him and Rishi Sunak are on the same page, really. They're saying that Israel has the right to defend itself, but they also argue, and neither are using the word ceasefire. And so this is where the Palestinian community within the Labour Party are feeling like that he's too far pro-Jewish community, and seen by some as being too pro-Israel with insufficient expression of concern for the Palestinians. This goes back to an interview that he did with LBC, a radio station, a couple of weeks ago, where he said, if asked whether cutting off the water supply for Gaza and electricity, and he said that was proportionate.
Did he say that?
Well, he said he now claims that he was saying that he thinks Israel does have the right to defend itself. So he was saying he was misquoted or taken out of terms. But either way, Labour councillors are now resigning, and there are fears that people on the front bench might do the same within the Labour Party. So it's anything that can't, he doesn't want to rock the boat at all at this stage. He's doing very well in terms of the recent by-elections, beating the Conservatives in many of those.
And still great in the polls.
Doing well in the polls. Looks like he's on course for, a majority at the next general election. So he doesn't want anything to really get in the way of that. And then they had this unfortunate trip, I think, to Cardiff, to a mosque, which lots of people said was kind of like just playing politics or a little bit too simple. So he's trying to reassure everyone and not provoke anyone within the party. But it is, as we've said so many times, such a delicate issue, this, and such a hard balance to get right.
Once the boots are on the ground, let's see how the mood music in this country shifts. Thanks, Simon. Cocoa has surged to the highest level in 44 years as global shortages boost costs for chocolate makers. Despite efforts from various charitable movements across the globe, there are still tens of thousands of people currently working in unfavourable conditions and being paid poorly by large corporations. This sentiment made up part of the discussions being held in London this week during the annual International Cocoa and Chocolate Forum. The event's founder, His Royal Majesty Oba Dokun Thompson, and Chief Marketing Officer Clay Gordon joined me earlier in the studio for more on this. Your Royal Highness Oba Dokun Thompson, Clay Gordon, thank you so much for joining me in the Channel's Business Global studios. You've been very busy this week, Kabiesi, because of course you've been putting on another International Cocoa and Chocolate Forum. In fact, thank you for the chocolate. I've kept it off the set because I don't want to be eating it throughout this discussion. But of course, this takes place annually. What exactly are your visions for this year's summit?
It's actually very simple. We have a new regulation by the EU being the biggest buyer of the African or West African cocoa, I should call it, what we call the EU deregulation, regulation on deforestation. So that's what our theme for the International Cocoa Chocolate Forum is about. It's really to discuss the policy, compliance issues, and the timelines. But beyond that, what do we need to look into to get something out of it that can create value for our own purpose, rather than just looking at those who are purchasing the cocoa, taking them away and creating more value for themselves.
Of course, the big corporations. Clay, it's soon to be Halloween, so of course lots of people are going to be eating lots of chocolate, if of course you celebrate Halloween, because I know not everybody does. But could you please give us an oversight of the cocoa market? Because before the interview I was doing some research, and this week in particular, cocoa stocks have surged on the New York Stock Exchange for several reasons, mainly due to weather. So there are lots of people making money from this commodity, but not necessarily the smallholder farmers.
You're absolutely right. There is a huge disconnect between how the market values cocoa and how the traders see cocoa and what the farmers are going to be compensated for their work. So right now what is happening is you're seeing traders who are taking advantage of a perceived shortfall, and they're playing hedging strategies in the market to figure out how to reduce risk, but also to make money. For the average cocoa farmer, their only participation in the market is when they sell their cocoa. So any of the added value in the cocoa, even before it gets to the factory where it's converted into chocolate, for the most part, they don't participate in.
Wow.
Right? And this is one of the reasons why there is a lot of interest in adding value in the producing country. So how do we go and convert the cocoa beans, which are normally an exported product, and then perhaps convert them into products, which may be chocolate or many other kinds of things which we can make from cocoa, and be able to consume them locally. And if we can keep that value in the local economy, that's good for everybody locally.
Absolutely, it is good, but it seems as if we're having this conversation every year. Are these conversations actually trickling down into reality? Are we building the infrastructure? Is everything in place so that we can add value in somewhere like Etioni in Osun State?
Well, what we have to understand is the biggest challenge for being able to add value in these sort of circumstances is two things. One, technology in terms of machinery. Then a second, of course, funding. The understanding is there, but the more we keep on talking about it, the more we can create interest, and perhaps we can have the right investors in place who can actually add value. If you look at some of the West African cocoa markets, let's look at Ghana or Ivory Coast. There's considerable level of value addition, but majority, or possibly over 70–80% of those adding value belong to the same multinationals. Yeah. So at the end of the day, the value is still taken away from these producing regions.
How do
And that's what we have
disrupt
to
that?
change.
Yeah, how do we disrupt that, Clay?
Well, there's a fundamental difference between being a producing country and being a consuming country, right? And one of the challenges that we face in West Africa is that there is no real culture of chocolate consumption, right? So cocoa is a colonial product. It was meant as an export. But if we go to a country like Colombia or we go to Mexico, right, they value cocoa and they consume chocolate on a daily basis. And so one of the ways to be disruptive is to...
Rot children's teeth?
Well, actually, there is a chemical in cocoa, right, which actually improves dental health. It's the sugar in chocolate that's bad.
It's the sugar that's bad, yes. I've learned that from some of your sessions in the past.
But cocoa gets exported, and then chocolate gets imported. And there is a sense in which we value international brands over local brands. And so one way to disrupt this entire process is to start valuing local entrepreneurs who are doing the conversion of cocoa into chocolate products and buying those preferentially over some well-known UK brand that everybody knows.
But at least we've got stakeholders like you guys who are flying the flag, who are traveling the world, putting on events like this, educating us, and hopefully, again...
At our cost.
At a cost. But it's a great investment. Your Royal Highness, Kabiesi Oba Dokun Thompson, and Clay Gordon, who is the Chief Marketing Officer of International Cocoa Diplomacy, which, of course, you are the founder, Kabiesi. Thank you so much, gentlemen.
It's been a pleasure. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much.
Now to my final topic. This week, prominent members of the Nigerian community living here in the United Kingdom bid farewell to Ambassador Sharifa Tunji Isola, the outgoing Nigeria High Commissioner to the United Kingdom. Officially joining the mission in January 2021, following a 6-month COVID-19 delay, Ambassador Sharifa witnessed the death of Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth II, the coronation of King Charles III, and the ambassador was incremental in ensuring Nigeria was removed from Britain's red list during the COVID-19 lockdowns. The send-off was held at the diplomat's official residence, Abuja House.
Nigeria will be whatever you call it. So once you have that at the back of your mind, sometimes we're a spiritual nation. The power of the tongue is very strong. If you continue to see your country in the air and say negative things about your country and you want it to be positive, it's a big challenge. There's no country in this world that does not have its challenge. The economy is biting all over the world. You know, so sometimes some of our people think that it's eureka in Western countries of the world, but you and I know that with Russia and Ukraine war and the smart of COVID, many economies are in bad shape. Instead of people appreciating this from that perspective, they single out our country and, we go into a form of criticism. Yes, you can criticize a government, but in criticizing, motivation should be at the back of your mind. What is the government doing well? You must be able to acknowledge that. Even where you think the government is not doing well, you must provide alternative. That okay, this is being done, but it would have been better if it's done this way. That is how countries develop, because each time you try to bring your country down, it goes back to you, and so that is number one. Then there has to be a paradigm shift. We don't have sense of patriotism, country first, and we continue to disparage our leaders. Right from independence today, it's always been the same. And I keep on telling our people that we cannot develop our country this way.
Well, sadly, that's all we have time for today. But as always, do get in touch with your comments and suggestions. I'll see you at the same time next week for more in-depth business analysis on Channel's Business Global. Goodbye.